God's purpose in creation, verse 18 and 19. Look at verse 19. It says, I have not spoken in secret in a dark place of the earth. I said not unto the seed of Jacob, seek ye me in vain. I, the Lord, speak righteousness. I declare things that are right. Here again, God is not an unknowable God. Karl Barth is a theologian of the 20th century who died in the mid-50s, I believe, a Swiss theologian, who defined God as totally other, so other than us, so different from us, that the only way that we can know Him is if God reveals Himself to us, and that is correct, but when you overemphasize the otherness of God, you get an unknowable God. And I don't have time to go into Barth theology right now, but here, God Himself, in revealing Himself, says, I have not spoken in secret. You run across people who say, oh, yeah, I've read the Bible, but there's no way that we can understand what God tries to communicate to us because He is just so other, He's so different, Well, no, God Himself said He didn't speak in secret. And He's a righteous God, and He declares things that are right. Now we have in verse 20 to 25, no contest with idols as evidenced in this prophecy. Verse 20 to 25, there's really no contest. Assemble yourselves and come, draw near together. He's still talking to the idols of the nations. You that are escaped of the nations. They have no knowledge that set up the wood of the graven image and pray unto a God that cannot save. Tell ye and bring them near. Yea, let them take counsel together. Who's declared this from an ancient time? Who has told it from that time? Have not I the Lord, and there is no God else beside me? A just God and a Saviour, there is none beside me. Look unto me, and be ye saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God, and there is none else. So again and again, the emphasis is the idols are nothing, made out of wood and stone and silver and whatnot, made by man's hands, which are feeble and frail and limited and temporal, and I am your God. All right, chapter 46, the fall of Babylon and her gods. Chapter 46, verse 1 to chapter 47, verse 15. The fall of Babylon and her gods. First of all, we have the contrast between God and the idols of Babylon, verse 1 to 13, which is the entire chapter. The contrast between God and the idols of Babylon. I must have been getting tired at this point. I can't believe I did this. I'll tell you about it in a minute. First of all, verses 1 and 2, their idols will themselves go into captivity and be humbled. Their idols go into captivity and are humbled. Bel boweth down, Nebo stoopeth. Their idols were upon the beasts and upon the cattle. Your carriages were heavy laden, they are a burden to the weary beast. Listen, here Babylon is being taken away captive, and the mules are burdened down with the weight of these idols as they trot off into captivity. They stoop, they bow down together. They could not deliver the burden, but themselves are gone into captivity. What an ironic picture here. Verse 3 and 4, God is able to sustain and rescue His people, in contrast to the gods of the Babylon. In Babylon, not only are the gods unable to deliver, they themselves are being carried away by the mules into captivity. But in verse 3 and 4, our God is able to sustain and rescue His people. Hearken unto me, O house of Jacob, and all the remnant of the house of Israel, which are born by me from the belly, which are carried from the womb, and even to your old age I am He, and even to hoar hairs will I carry you. I have made, and I will bear, even I will carry, and will deliver you. You see the play on words here? Here the mules are carrying the gods away into captivity, and here God is saying, I will carry you into freedom. That's the contrast. So you can see how how an idol can become a monkey on your back and a real burden. You can end up carrying your God, whatever idol it might be, and it will dominate you and enslave you, and you and your God will go off into captivity and bondage together. But our God promises to hold us up and carry us, and rather than Him being a burden to us, we are a burden to Him, and He carries us off into freedom and liberation. Wonderful contrast. Verse 5 to 7, comparison of God with idols, verses 5 to 7. To whom will you liken me, and make me equal, and compare me, that we may be like? They lavish gold out of the bag, and weigh silver in the balance, and hire a goldsmith, and he maketh a god. They fall down, yea, they worship. They bear him upon the shoulder, they carry him, and set him in his place. And he standeth, from his place shall he not remove. Yea, one shall cry unto him, yet can he not answer, nor save him out of his trouble. Remember this, and show yourselves men. Bring it again to mind, O ye transgressors. So here is the comparison of God with idols. And then from verses 8 to 13, I've got things to keep in mind. And I don't know why I said that, because that's such a... I could have said things to keep in mind for every section in this outline. Maybe I just couldn't think of a heading. I don't know. Yeah, okay, maybe that's why. Things to keep in mind. Remember this and show yourselves men. Verse 9. Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none like me. Well, here we have again, remember the former things of old. Whereas, interesting. Okay, let's figure this out. Back in 43, verse 18, remember not the former things. Chang, we have a problem. Homework.
It doesn't matter.
It'll be a nice homework.
You know already, we know already.
Well, no, you work on this.
So sometimes...
You explain it to us tomorrow. Okay, what former things not to think about, and what former things we are supposed to think about.
Remember not Old Testament, remember the New Testament.
Yeah. Remember not the homework.
Remember not homework.
Yeah. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. Calling a ravenous bird from the east, the man that executeth my counsel from a far country. Yea, I have spoken it, I will also bring it to pass. I have purposed it, I also will do it. Hearken unto me, you stout-hearted, that are far from righteousness. I bring near my righteousness, it shall not be far off, and my salvation shall not tarry. I will place salvation in Zion. Well, let's entitle this section God's Promise of Redemption again. Or Salvation. Promise of Salvation. Verses 8 to 13. Then in chapter 47, verses 1 to 15, we have the collapse and humiliation of the Queen of Kingdoms. The collapse and humiliation of the Queen of Kingdoms. Babylon's shame and humiliation is predicted.
Chapter 47, 1 to 15.
Verses 1 to 3, Babylon's shame and humiliation predicted. Verse 4 almost struck me as a signature of God, the signature of her judge. Like God bringing down his gavel and saying, this is my judgment. As Redeemer, the Lord of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel. So verse 1 and 3 is the judgment pronounced, or the shame described that they're going to experience, and then God signs his name to that. Verses 5 to 7, Babylon's sovereignty comes to an end. Thou shalt no more be called the Lady of Kingdoms. Now, we have a reason for the judgment given here. I was wroth with my people. I have polluted mine inheritance and given them into thine hand. He's addressing Babylon. Verse 6. Thou didst show them no mercy. Upon the ancient hast thou very heavily laid thy yoke. In other words, even the old people you really burdened heavily. And thou saidst, I shall be a lady forever, so that thou didst not lay these things to thy heart, neither didst remember the latter end of it. You didn't think about your destiny. You assumed that you would have power forever. You were arrogant. You were prideful. Therefore, hear now this, thou that art given to pleasures, that dwellest carelessly in thy heart, I am, and none else beside me. I shall not sit as a widow, neither shall I know the loss of children. But these two things shall come to thee in a moment, in one day, the loss of children and widowhood. Again, the very thing that your mouth brags about in pride and arrogance will return to haunt you and become an albatross. That will be your judgment, it seems, again and again. You bragged, now you're going to have what you bragged stuffed down your throat. So, Babylon's self-sufficiency is judged, verses 8 to 11. Again, verse 10, Thou hast trusted in thy wickedness, thou hast said, None seeth me. Thy wisdom and thy knowledge, it hath perverted thee, and thou hast said in thine heart, I am, and none else beside me. That's repeated twice now. I am, and none else beside me. Self-sufficiency. So Babylon's self-sufficiency is judged, verses 8 to 11, and verses 12 to 15, Jehovah taunts Babylon. Jehovah taunts Babylon. Verse 12 to 15. Stand now with thine enchantments, and with the multitude of thy sorceries, wherein thou hast labored from thy youth, if so be thou shalt be able to profit, if so be thou mayest prevail. Thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsels. Let now the astrologers, the stargazers, the monthly prognosticators stand up, and save thee from these things that shall come upon thee. Behold, they shall be as stubble. The fire shall burn them. They shall not deliver themselves from the power of the flame. There shall not be a coal to warm at, nor fire to sit before it. Thus shall they be unto thee with whom thou hast labored, even thy merchants. From thy youth they shall wander, every one to his quarter. None shall save thee. Here even the wisest in the land, the soothsayers, the psychics, the fortune tellers, the diviners, can't do a thing against the power of God. And God taunts them.
One interesting is in Korea, one of my brother or sister, I don't remember, he visited the fortune teller.
Yes.
And he told him, my brother and sister, you're a Christian, I cannot give you a fortune teller because your spirit is different.
Oh.
So I can tell because you belong to the different spirit.
I see.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And also one shaman, when he tried contact with the evil spirit to make a bless any certain family, they invite the whole village people, and he danced with a big knife. He cannot, the usual lady, she cannot dance without the evil spirit power, very sharp big knife. He danced supernaturally. Before that, he had a ceremony, and when my mother attended that a long time ago, and he asked the house owner to let my mother depart. The shaman said, as long as that Christian stay here, but she knows supernaturally because she was invited from far away, so she don't know who is Christian and not. But supernaturally know, as long as the Christian there, then I cannot dance here because it's bothering because the Christian spirit.
Yes, I've frequently heard stories like that as well. Yeah.
I was grown up in that situation.
Yeah. Friend of mine moved to Orangeville just recently, and she was looking for a house. She was house hunting, and the one house that she went to look at, the one that she wanted to buy, the lady in the house said, "Oh, I didn't know you were coming." And she thought nothing of it. And then during the course of the conversation, she found out that she was a psychic, and that's how she made her living, as a psychic. She badly wanted to just confront her with it and say, "I thought you're a psychic, you should have known that I was coming." But anyway. Chapter 48, we'll just bring things to a conclusion here. Chapter 48, verses 1 to 22, the release of rebellious Israel. The release of rebellious Israel, verses 1 to 22. In verse 1 to 5, we are reminded that they are a privileged people, but also a very stubborn people. Hear this, O house of Jacob, which are called by the name of Israel, and are come forth out of the waters of Judah, which swear by the name of the Lord, and make mention of the God of Israel, but not in truth, nor in righteousness. For they call themselves of the holy city, and stay themselves upon the God of Israel. The Lord of hosts is his name. I have declared the former things from the beginning, and they went forth out of my mouth, and I showed them. I did them suddenly, and they came to pass, because I knew that thou art obstinate, and thy neck is as an iron sinew, and thy brow brass. I have even from the beginning declared it to thee. Before it came to pass I showed it to thee, lest thou shouldst say, Mine idol hath done them, and my graven image and my molten image has commanded them. So we have a privileged people who is also a stubborn people. Then God shares a secret with his people. Verse 6b to verse 11. Thou hast heard, see all this, and will ye not declare it? That's 6a. And we start the new section with 6b. I have showed thee new things from this time, even hidden things, and thou didst not know them. They are created now, and not from the beginning, even before the day when thou heardest them not, lest thou shouldst say, Behold, I knew them. Yea, thou heardest not, yea, thou knewest not, yea, from that time that thine ear was not opened, for I knew that thou wouldst deal very treacherously, and wast called a transgressor from the womb. For my name's sake will I defer mine anger, and for my praise will I refrain for thee, that I cut thee not off. Behold, I have refined thee, but not with silver. I have chosen thee in a furnace of affliction. For mine own sake, even for mine own sake, I will do it. For how should my name be polluted? And I will not give my glory unto another. God is saying, I am going to follow through with my promises, not because of you, but because of my own name, because of my reputation, because of my word. And that's the secret. His glory, his name's sake. Verse 12 to 15, God will set his people free. Hearken unto me, O Jacob and Israel, my called, I am he, I am the first, I am also the last. Mine hand also hath laid the foundation of the earth, and my right hand hath spanned the heavens. When I call unto them, they stand up together. All ye assemble yourselves and hear, which among them hath declared these things. The Lord hath loved him, he will do his pleasure on Babylon, his arm shall be on the Chaldeans. I, even I, have spoken. Yea, I have called him, I have brought him, and he shall make his way prosperous. God will set his people free. Fourthly, peace and fruitful blessing follows obedience. Verses 16 to 19.
What's that?
Peace and fruitful blessing follows obedience. Come near unto me, hear ye this. I have not spoken in the secret from the beginning. Now several times in this passage he refers to secret. I have not spoken in secret from the beginning. From the time that it was, there am I, and now the Lord God and his Spirit hath sent me. Thus saith the Lord, thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, I am the Lord thy God, which teacheth thee to profit, which leadeth thee by the way that thou shouldst go. O that thou hadst hearkened to my commandments, then had thy peace been as a river, and thy righteousness as the waves of the sea. Thy seed also had been as the sand, and the offspring of thy bowels like the gravel thereof. His name should not have been cut off, nor destroyed from before me. So, peace and fruitful blessing follows obedience. Then 20 to 21, freedom from Babylon. Go ye forth of Babylon, flee from the Chaldeans. With a voice of singing declare ye, tell this, utter it to the end of the earth. Say ye, the Lord has redeemed his servant Jacob. And they thirsted not when he led them through the deserts. He caused the waters to flow out of the rock for them. He clave the rock also, and the waters gushed out. So there we have freedom or liberation from Babylon, verses 20 to 21. And then, almost as an afterthought, but it's not an afterthought, I believe it fits in with the passage. Peace is absent from the evildoer, verse 22. There is no peace, saith the Lord, unto the wicked. Which fits in, by the way, with a sort of an inclusio thing happening here again, because Israel is promised peace. Remember? Verse 18. O that thou hadst hearkened to my commandments, then had thy peace been as a river. Verse 22, there is no peace, saith the Lord. It's like they are released from the city of Babylon, and they are getting ready to go home, and God is saying, have you learned your lesson? There is no peace to the wicked.
So, this expression is just interesting. Peace like a river, and the righteous is like the wave of the sea. The wave of the sea is a big wave, and it was never cease. Continually.
Yeah.
But our righteousness, sometimes righteous, next time, we have no guarantee next time righteousness, if we are weak. But the waves of the sea never cease. When I waiting, it never cease.
Yeah.
So interesting, yeah? And also, when you see the desert, there's a lot of rock. If Phil, how is it going? Everything is okay? How's your wife? I said a greeting from evangelist Bon Ocheng. He is now very well known in northern Michigan area. Okay, see you.
Okay, we're now in chapter 49 of Isaiah, chapter 49. So if you would turn there, please. It seems that as we head towards the end of the book, I don't know about you, but I get the sense of going through a tunnel. And we've been through a very dark section of the tunnel with only words that we can hang on in terms of belief and faith that there's light at the end of the tunnel. And now we're actually starting to see glimpses of light. And the light seems, we seem to be getting flashes of brighter and brighter light with episodes of darkness in between as we continue to travel through the tunnel. And I think we're eventually going to burst out into just a gorgeous valley or mountaintop of light and resolution of all of this judgment. So today we begin with a section, chapter 49 to chapter 53, verse 12, entitled Ministry of the Servant of the Lord. The Ministry of the Servant of the Lord. You have as a subheading the work of the servant, 49, 1 to 7, in your notes, I believe. The work of the servant. Listen, O isles, unto me, and hearken, you people from far. The Lord hath called me from the womb, from the bowels of my mother hath he made mention of my name. He hath made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand hath he hid me, and made me a polished shaft. In his quiver hath he hid me. And said unto me, Thou art my servant, O Israel, in whom I will be glorified. Then I said, I have labored in vain, I have spent my strength for naught, and in vain. Yet surely my judgment is with the Lord, my work with my God. And now saith the Lord, that formed me from the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob again to him, Though Israel be not gathered, yet shall I be glorious in the eyes of the Lord, and my God shall be my strength. And he said, It is a light thing that thou shouldst be my servant, to raise up the tribes of Jacob, and to restore the preserved of Israel. I will also give thee for a light to the Gentiles, that thou mayest be my salvation unto the end of the earth. Thus saith the Lord, the Redeemer of Israel, and his Holy One, to him whom man despiseth, to him whom the nation abhorreth, to a servant of rulers, kings shall see and arise, princes also shall worship, because of the Lord that is faithful, and the Holy One of Israel, and he shall choose thee. Who's the servant in this portion of Scripture? Chapter 49, verse 1 to 7. Anyone? The Anointed One? What were you going to say, Jason? Isaiah? Come on in.
Israel. Sorry to restrict your class. I need a pair of hands for about 1 minute.
A pair of hands for... How urgent is it?
I have to put it down. I got that set of shelves.
Okay, we asked the question, who is the servant in chapter 49, verses 1 to 7? Jason guessed that it was Isaiah. James asserted that it was Israel. Any other suggestions here? Yes, sir. Messiah. Pardon me, Jason?
Messiah for a second, yes.
You would go for Messiah? Messiah? What about you, Bob?
I haven't had time to look at it.
3 verse 3.
He's a Bob.
Oh, Israel.
You think it's Israel?
Maybe part of it.
Okay.
It sometimes talks about Messiah in some part.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be the Messiah is like
So-
be my servant. Raise
so-
up the tribes of Jacob. That would be Messiah there in verse 6.
So Bob covers his tail by saying it's both. Okay. Alright, well, I would have to say it's Messiah, because the task that's given this Holy One is something that becomes logically ludicrous if it's Israel. And his origin is also not the typical way in which the origin of Israel is described. For instance, the Lord hath called me from the womb, from the bowels of my mother hath he made mention of my name. Verse 1, I'm sorry. This could very well be an allusion to the Virgin Mother Mary. Also, verse 2, the meaning of verse 2 kind of goes lost if it becomes Israel. If he hath made my mouth like a sharp sword, in the shadow of his hand hath he hid me, and made me a polished shaft, in his quiver hath he hid me. This makes a lot of sense if it's the Messiah, because obviously in the Old Testament, the second person of the Godhead was not revealed. He was rather hidden, wasn't he? At least the knowledge of it.
It could also be Isaiah too, no?
Look at verse 5. Now, verse 4 sounds like Isaiah's sentiment.
Yeah. You can't
I've
be
labored
everything all the time.
I've labored in vain, I've spent my strength for naught, and in vain, yet my judgment was with the Lord, and my work with my God. But when we get to verse 6, it says, It is a light thing that thou shouldst be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob, and to restore the preserved of Israel. I will also give thee for a light to the Gentiles. Now, if this was Israel, certainly Israel itself was to be a light to the nations, but Christ, being the servant, epitomizes the ideal Israel, and does as an individual what the nation of Israel should have been doing all along. And certainly Jesus Christ was came into the world not only to restore Israel, but also to be a light unto the Gentiles, and to be God's salvation unto the end of the world.
Jesus Christ emphasized the preaching of the end of the world.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Isaiah could be 1-4, no? Or 1-3.
Well, when you come to a messianic portion like this, I'm trying to remember, in the Psalms generally, when you have the messianic Psalms, it seems very unlikely that it refers to anyone else but the Messiah. I'm just not sure whether in the intention of the author and in the intention of the writing of any other portions where there's messianic predictions, whether it can be a double application. Certainly the verse 4 throws me. Commentators have said in verse 4 that this is Christ in his humanity. I have labored in vain, I have spent my strength for naught and in vain, yet surely my judgment is with the Lord and my work with my God. They say that in his humanity he did have moments of, thinking, this is not getting anywhere, That seems to contradict directly something else that is said about the Messiah back in chapter, where was this other servant song? Where it says that he will not be discouraged. Do you remember that? Yeah. And that he will not faint or draw back. So I don't know that we can apply verse 4 to Messiah. And we'll just maybe have to leave that question open. Sure you can.
Maybe 1:7 or 1:6. Maybe it just has a simple fulfillment in Isaiah and a full fulfillment in the Messiah. Like if you read it, well, even 6. If you read it, then would not since he had a ministry with Israel and Judah, in a sense, by pronouncing judgment and yet consolation at the end. And encouragement, would he not be, in a sense, like raising up, trying to pick them up out of where their sin is and encouraging them to worship God? So in a simple way, Isaiah could be sort of fulfilling these things.
It's remotely possible, but the things that we read right in that first part of the passage right away tell me, that this kind of excludes Isaiah. For instance, the mention, from the bowels of my mother hath he made mention of my name. That was true of Jeremiah. God knew Jeremiah before he was born, but there's no reference to Isaiah's birth, and yet, his name shall be called Emmanuel.
That's other portions.
His name shall be called Jesus. There are references in Scripture to Jesus being known by name before he was born. Verse 2, made my mouth like a sharp sword. Immediately the picture of Christ jumps into view in the book of Revelation, where he appears with a sharp sword protruding out of his mouth. I worked over, he made me a polished shaft, and in his quiver hath he hidden me. A polished shaft, those are arrows, and arrows are used in judgment. I'm not sure just exactly how that would apply to Isaiah, except that I think in Isaiah's commission he is commissioned as a prophet to bring judgment. So in trying to make it fit Isaiah, it's kind of a hit and miss thing, but certainly the majority of what is expressed here does apply to Christ, and it does fit. If you're trying different hypotheses, okay, let's superimpose Isaiah on this and let's see if it fits. Let's superimpose Christ. Let's superimpose, Israel. And that's how you work at it.
Well, when Isaiah was preaching this, what would the people think? They were thinking, well, yeah, he's talking about Christ. Like, getting back really to the time of the book and stuff. I'm just wondering, like in the Psalm, that asked the same question. When it says, when the suffering servant, in the Psalms, 1:7 or whatever. Mm-hmm. And with that David talking, expressing his feeling, or like in just a simple, and yet we see it fulfilled totally in Christ. That maybe Christ experienced the things David was using as pictures to describe what he was doing.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. The implication that everything is written for the immediate audience, although that's true, doesn't mean, the implication is not that the audience understood everything that was being said at the time. That becomes very obvious in Isaiah chapter 53, where it's clearly predicting Christ. But my vote would come down on the side of this being the major application, or the major fulfillment would be in the Messiah, in Christ, and perhaps with a minor application to Isaiah. So what do you do with the reference to Israel in verse 3? He said unto me, Thou art my servant, O Israel, in whom I will be glorified. Well, I have no problem with this being a name of honor, a title of honor applied to Christ. Excuse me, I didn't invite you here. It certainly cannot mean Israel as it was, because Israel was in rebellion, but it can mean Israel as it should be.
What about all these other passages where it says Israel is his servant? There's quite a number of them.
That's right. Yep. As I was just saying, when God refers to Israel as a servant, he refers to Israel as a servant as Israel should be, the ideal Israel, that it ought to be demonstrating the character of a servant's heart.
In a sense, Jesus Christ born in Israel,
Yes.
Israel nation,
Yes.
and his first preaching is started in Israel, and his 12 disciples and his apostle. So we can say, Israel, my servant. In Israel, there is God's chosen apostle or disciple. Even in Jesus Christ, before you told us. So
Yeah.
we simply say, Israel, my servant.
Yep. Well,
Because descendant of David, they all descendant.
remember the triangle that I drew the other day? I think it makes a lot of sense. Where Israel is depicted as the servant of the Lord, where the remnant is depicted as the servant of the Lord and the Messiah. And every one of these depict the characteristics of the servant. Okay? Alright, quit dissecting those flies. Oh, now he's bombing them with erasers. One other thing I wanted to point out here, which is which I would like to cross-reference with 1 Corinthians chapter 4. It says here, verse 4b, Yet surely my judgment is with the Lord, and my work with my God. Whether this is Isaiah or the Lord Jesus Christ himself, the point is that whoever this was, he was not grading himself as to his work. He was not judging his own work and evaluating it in the sense of bringing in the final mark. Turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 4 for a minute. If you're going to be involved in the Lord's work in any way, you're going to have to understand this passage clearly, or you will flounder. As long as you are working with people, ministering to people, you will discover after the honeymoon is over that they will always evaluate you, and they will always attempt to put a grade on you. Say, well, yeah, he's a good preacher, but Paul says, now this does not mean that we should not seriously examine our hearts, this does not mean that we should be careless. We ought to be doing our best all the time. But here it says in verse 3, where Paul's ministry is being brought into question, With me it is a very small thing that I should be judged of you or of man's judgment. Yea, I judge not mine own self. Number one, he says, I don't care what you think of me. Well, in one sense, we ought to care what people think, simply because we are to love one another, but it's not that kind of careless relationship that Paul's talking about here. He's talking about those individuals who are saying, well, I am of Paul, others are saying, I am of Apollos, others are saying, I am of Cephas. And Paul says, that kind of stuff doesn't bother me. I don't care how you pigeonhole me. He says, I don't even do that to myself. For I know nothing by myself. He's saying, in and of myself, I don't know how I do. Yet I am not hereby justified. Oh, actually, verse 4, he says, I know that. The meaning there is, I don't know anything that is outstanding. I don't know that I'm guilty of anything. I have a clear conscience, okay? But he says, I'm not. That doesn't make me justified just because I have a clear conscience. He that judges me is the Lord. The Lord knows. And then he says, therefore judge nothing before the time until the Lord come. Now here I can see directly how Paul's knowledge of Isaiah and this particular verse, this verse in particular, could give him these thoughts here, and he fleshes these thoughts out. Because if this is a messianic psalm, and I believe it is, then the application here is for everyone. Surely my judgment is with the Lord. We will let the Lord judge. My work is with God. I will let it be up to the Lord to weigh my work in the balances. Okay, so on one hand, yes, of course, we're supposed to, when we have homiletics, for instance, we're going to listen to your sermons that you bring to class. We're going to grade you on how you do, okay? And don't you dare come back at me with this verse and say, well, I don't care what you think. Okay? But we're talking in terms of personal judgment. And when it comes to personal judgment and evaluation, we've got to leave it to the Lord. We've got to leave it up to the Lord. You know that feeling, some of you have preached sermons before, and I think of ministry because that's the closest thing to my heart. And after the message, there's that niggling question in the back of your mind, I wonder how I did. I wonder if it came across. And it makes you feel good when 2 or 3 people come up and say, there's the routine, good message, good message, handshaking, gone. But there will be 1 or 2 or 3 that might come and say, that really blessed my heart. And those are the ones that really encourage you, But even those, you can't take them into the core of your heart and use those as a real basis of evaluation. You have to leave the final judgment with the Lord. Not just on your sermon, but on your whole life. Your whole life's ministry. So there's a lot more in a little phrase than first meets the eye. You follow something through from Isaiah into the New Testament and see where some of the New Testament authors got their food for thought, and you can see clearly the connections. Moving on now, past the first section, the work of the servant, verses 1 to 7, we're now into Jehovah's response to his servant. Jehovah's response to his servant. Thus saith the Lord, thy Redeemer of Israel, and his Holy One, to whom man despiseth him, to him whom man despiseth, to him whom the nation abhorreth, to a servant of rulers, kings shall see and arise, princes also shall worship, because of the Lord that is faithful, and the Holy One of Israel, and he shall choose thee. Thus saith the Lord, in an acceptable time have I heard thee, and in a day of salvation I have helped thee, and I will preserve thee, and give thee for a covenant of the people, to establish the earth, to cause to inherit the desolate heritages. So we have now the response of Jehovah to his servant, and in verse 7 we have his exaltation. Verse 7 is the servant's exaltation, and verse 8 is the servant's preservation and inheritance. Verse 8 was the servant's preservation and inheritance. Does verse 7 remind you of chapter 52 and 3, where Messiah is described as one whose visage is marred, one who is not particularly attractive, one who is despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief? Do you think this could also be Isaiah, James?
I think it is Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
It could be. Well, Isaiah was sawed in half. He wasn't right.
Well, that's an urban legend that he was saw would have, but it's quite likely.
His tradition that is related.
Okay, kings shall see and arise, princes also shall worship. At any rate, we'll move on. Chapter 49, verse 9 to 26. The return home and the growing population. The return home predicted and the growing population. Verse 9 to 13, the return of the people to the land.